My name is Frances Frell. I'm 32 years old. And 2 hours ago, I signed paperwork that will force my father to pay me $320,000. Or lose control of the company my grandfather built. He has no idea yet. Right now, he's inside his dining room straightening his tie in front of a hallway mirror. Practicing a speech on a yellow legal pad. 25 relatives are waiting around a polished oak table with candles Diane picked out specifically for tonight. There's a photographer coming. There's champagne chilling in the kitchen. And there's a gold frame sitting beside the fireplace covered with a white cloth. Waiting for a dramatic reveal. I know exactly what's under the cloth. I know because I saw it 4 days ago sitting on my father's office desk beside a coffee mug and a stack of unpaid invoices. A certificate of adult adoption. My father is officially adopting my stepsister Megan tonight. And honestly, that part isn't even what broke me. What broke me was the speech. 47 words scribbled across a yellow legal pad. One sentence in particular. I finally have the daughter I always deserved. I counted the words twice. My name appeared 0 times. And that sentence is why I spent Friday afternoon inside a lawyer's office signing documents my grandfather prepared 27 years ago for exactly this situation. But here's the thing nobody at that dinner understands yet. The speech isn't the ending. The white envelope arriving at my father's office in 9 business days. That's the ending. And once he opens it, the clock starts. 90 days. That's how long he'll have to figure out how to keep the company. My father used to tell me I'd hold everything together someday. I was 8 years old the first time he said it. He drove me to a construction site outside Ridgewood County before sunrise one Saturday morning. Fog still hanging low over the dirt lots. Stacks of plywood damp from dew. He lifted me onto a pile of lumber and pointed toward a steel beam running across the skeleton of a half-finished house. You see that beam, Franny? I nodded. That's what keeps the whole structure standing. Pause. That's gonna be you someday. Back then, I believed every word my father said. Rick Frell owned Frell & Sons Construction. 3rd-generation contractor. Local legend in Ridgewood County. The kind of man people slapped on the back at church picnics and called solid. He started swinging hammers at 19. Took over the business at 31 after my grandfather Harold semi-retired. Built it into the largest residential contractor in the county. Everyone respected Rick Frell. Including me. Especially me. My mother died when I was 7. Ovarian cancer. 34 years old. After that, it became just me, my father, and my grandfather Harold. And honestly, Harold was the real foundation beneath everything. My father built houses. Harold built systems. Payroll. Contracts. Tax structures. Vendor relationships. The invisible parts keeping the company alive after the drywall crews went home. He smelled like cedar shavings and black coffee. Kept butterscotch candies inside his desk drawer. Every Sunday after church, he let me sit on his lap inside his study stamping invoices with the company seal. Heavy cedar desk. Brass lamp. Glass paperweight shaped like a bear. I loved that room. It smelled like sawdust and old paper and certainty. One afternoon when I was 9. Harold stopped me while I was lining up invoices by date. Frances, he said quietly. I looked up. Never let anybody make you feel small in your own family. Interesting sentence for a 9-year-old. At the time, I didn't understand why he said it. I would later. My father met Diane Mitchell the summer before I left for college. She worked reception at a dental office on Oak Street. Blonde hair. Warm smile. Soft voice carefully designed to sound nurturing. She had an 8-year-old daughter named Megan. At first, Diane seemed kind. Honestly kind. She brought casseroles when my father worked late. Laughed at his stories. Remembered little details about his day. After years of grief, my father looked alive around her again. And I wanted that for him. I truly did. But Diane's warmth had limits. It extended beautifully toward my father. Toward Megan. Toward neighbors she wanted approval from. Not toward me. Her smile changed whenever my father left the room. Not dramatically. Not cruelly. Just dimmer. Like someone lowering a lamp slightly. 3 months after the wedding, she knocked softly on my bedroom door while I was home from college for fall break. Megan really needs a creative space, she said carefully. Would you mind moving some of your things into the guest room? I stared at her. My room? Just temporarily. It wasn't temporary. My posters disappeared first. Then my bookshelves. Then my desk. Megan's butterfly decals replaced everything within 2 weeks. By Christmas, my bedroom had become Megan's craft room completely. My things lived inside plastic bins upstairs beside old luggage. Then the photographs started changing. The framed wedding picture of my parents disappeared from the mantel first. Replaced by a counterfeit snapshot. Dad. Diane. Megan. And me standing slightly off to the side like someone accidentally included at the last second. By the following Christmas, there was a new professional portrait above the fireplace. Matching blue sweaters. Perfect lighting. Dad. Diane. Megan. No me. I wasn't even told the photo session happened. I discovered the portrait hanging above the fireplace when I came home from college break. Didn't you want me there? I asked quietly. Diane smiled while adjusting wrapping paper ribbons. Oh, honey, we thought you'd be busy. Interesting how often people assume your absence once excluding you becomes convenient. I wanted to become a structural engineer. Not because of money. Because of that steel beam conversation when I was 8. I wanted to build the things holding weight quietly. Bridges. Hospitals. Frameworks nobody notices until they fail. When I asked my father about helping with tuition, he sat at the kitchen table rubbing the back of his neck nervously. Engineering's expensive, Franny. Pause. Diane thinks teaching might suit you better. I looked at him carefully. Diane thinks? We both think. Except he wouldn't meet my eyes while saying it. So I worked. Scholarships. Night shifts at a copy center. Cheap apartments with unreliable heating. Ramen dinners. Student loans. I graduated from state with a structural engineering degree and $37,000 in debt. My father attended graduation. 5th row beside Diane and Megan. Megan played games on Diane's phone during the ceremony. Afterward, Dad hugged me quickly and said, "Knew you'd figure it out." Then left before the reception because Diane made dinner reservations. That sentence haunted me for years. Not, "I'm proud of you." Not, "You worked hard." Just, "Knew you'd figure it out." Like survival was simply expected from me automatically. Phone calls shortened after that. Every holiday became complicated. Every invitation arrived late or disappeared entirely. "Oh, Franny, we thought you were staying at school this Thanksgiving." Megan's recital changed Christmas dinner plans. Did nobody tell you? Interesting question. Because eventually, you realize nobody forgot. Someone simply decided your presence wasn't necessary enough to remember. Then my grandfather died. And everything underneath the family shifted permanently. My grandfather Harold died on a Tuesday morning in March. Heart attack. 79 years old. They found him slumped forward at his cedar desk inside the study. Reading glasses still on. Half a cup of coffee beside the brass lamp. Honestly, it felt impossible. Some people become so foundational inside a family. You assume they physically cannot disappear. Harold was one of those people. The funeral filled nearly every pew inside First Baptist Church on Elm Street. Contractors. Suppliers. Former employees. People Harold helped 30 years earlier who still remembered him calling after surgeries or showing up with meals after funerals. That was Harold. Quiet consistency. The kind people rarely appreciate fully until it's gone. I stood near the front greeting relatives while Diane complained softly about seating arrangements beside the coat rack. Immediate family should really be closer to the front, she whispered to my father. Interesting wording. Because she meant herself and Megan. Not me. Aunt Patrice heard her. Didn't say a word. Just took my elbow gently and moved me into the front pew beside her before the service began. Tiny act. Huge meaning. After the funeral, Harold's attorney approached me quietly near the church fellowship hall. Martin Cope. Brown suit. Soft voice. 30 years representing the Frell family business. Francis, he said carefully. Your grandfather left instructions for you specifically. We stepped into an empty Sunday school classroom smelling faintly like old coffee and crayons. Martin handed me a sealed envelope. Inside, one handwritten note and trust documents. I read the first sentence twice. 40% of Frell and Sons construction is held in trust for you. I blinked hard. What? Martin adjusted his glasses. The trust activates fully when you turn 30. I stared at him silently. 40%. Not sentimental jewelry. Not savings bonds. Ownership. Actual ownership. Martin lowered his voice slightly. Your father knows the trust exists. Pause. He does not know the details. Then he handed me Harold's handwritten note. One sentence was underlined twice. Your father is a good man with a weak spine. I felt physically cold reading it. Because somewhere deep down, I already knew. The note continued. This 40% is your seat at the table. Don't surrender it just because someone acts like you don't belong there. I folded the paper slowly. 24 years old. 6 years before the trust activated. At the time, I thought the documents were protection against future possibilities. I didn't realize they were preparation for a future Harold already saw coming clearly. The years after Harold died changed everything faster. Without him, there was nobody buffering Diane anymore. Nobody quietly correcting unfairness before it hardened into policy. My father drifted deeper into Diane's orbit gradually. Like someone walking farther into fog without realizing visibility disappeared miles ago. Family holidays became centered entirely around Megan. Her volleyball tournaments. Her college tours. Her birthdays celebrated like national holidays. Meanwhile, my milestones passed quietly. When I landed my first engineering contract designing a pediatric wing expansion, Dad texted, "Congrats, kiddo." 3 words. No phone call. No dinner. But when Megan got accepted into a marketing certificate program, Diane threw a catered backyard party with balloons. I stopped expecting equal treatment eventually. That's the dangerous thing about emotional neglect. Humans adapt to almost anything given enough time. Even invisibility. On my 30th birthday, I drove to Martin Cope's office and finalized the trust transfer officially. 40% ownership now existed under my name legally. Not symbolic. Not theoretical. State filings. Operating agreements. Tax documentation. Real ownership. Martin walked me through the paperwork carefully. 43 pages. Most of it standard corporate language. Then he stopped at clause 7.3. His finger tapped the paragraph once. This, he said quietly, is the clause Harold cared about most. I read it slowly. Twice. Then a third time. Voluntary relinquishment by any member triggered mandatory buyback at independently appraised fair market value. 90 days to pay. Failure triggered court-supervised restructuring. Which meant, if I ever chose to leave the company, my father would be legally forced to buy my shares. And if he couldn't, he'd lose operational control. I looked up slowly. Harold wrote this intentionally? Martin nodded immediately. He was very specific. Pause. He wanted to make sure nobody could erase you from the business quietly. Interesting sentence. Because by then, Harold already understood something painful about families. Sometimes exclusion doesn't happen dramatically. It happens administratively. One meeting you aren't invited to. One email chain missing your name. One locked office door at a time. I stored the agreement inside a fireproof lockbox in my condo closet afterward. And honestly, I hoped I'd never need it. For 2 years, I genuinely tried fixing things first. I emailed my father requesting meetings about company operations. No response. I sent certified letters asking for quarterly financial reviews. Ignored. I invited him to lunch 3 separate times. 1 cancellation. 1 forgotten. 1 14-minute conversation cut short because Megan needed a ride somewhere. 14 minutes. That became our longest meaningful interaction in nearly 2 years. Finally, I called Diane directly. Can we sit down as a family and talk about the business? Long silence. Then softly. Francis, why are you creating stress? Interesting. Not. You deserve involvement. Not. Let's work this out. Just stress. Because people benefiting from exclusion always describe accountability as disruption. I sent 14 emails over 24 months. 3 voicemails. 2 certified letters. 0 meetings. 0 acknowledgement that I owned nearly half the company financing my father's lifestyle. Then, 3 weeks before Father's Day, everything shifted. Cousin Nathan hosted a barbecue at his house. Normal family stuff. Paper plates. Cheap beer. Kids running through sprinklers. I arrived late. Walked around the backyard gate quietly. And heard Megan speaking near the grill before she noticed me. It's finally happening, she laughed. Dad's legally adopting me. One cousin said something too quietly to hear. Then Megan shrugged casually. Honestly, Francis was never really part of this family anyway. I stopped walking immediately. The world narrowed strangely. Not dramatic pain. Recognition. Like finally hearing someone say aloud the thing everyone quietly practiced for years. Megan looked directly at me then. Saw me standing there. And didn't apologize. Didn't even flinch. Just shrugged again. I mean, it's true. Nobody defended me immediately. That part mattered too. I turned around. Walked back toward my car slowly. Behind me, I finally heard Cousin Nathan say, Megan, that's messed up. And Megan answered, what? She knows it's true. I sat inside my car gripping the steering wheel for nearly 10 minutes afterward. Engine off. Hands locked at 10 and 2 like I was preparing for impact. Then I called Martin Cope. What time can I come in Friday? He understood immediately. No explanation required. The next Tuesday, I stopped by my father's office to deliver quarterly paperwork requiring his signature. Reception desk empty. Door open. And there, sitting directly beside his coffee mug, was the framed adoption certificate. Gold trim. Elegant calligraphy. Megan Elizabeth Mitchell officially adopted by Richard Allen Frell. Already signed by Megan. Waiting only for my father and the judge. Next to it sat a yellow legal pad. Dad's handwriting. Speech draft. I should not have read it. I know that. But I did anyway. 47 words. And one sentence carved straight through me. I finally have the daughter I always deserved. I read it twice. Then counted. Megan's name appeared 11 times. Mine. 0. I left the paperwork and signed beside the desk and walked out without saying a word. That night, I called Martin again. The documents, I said quietly. Prepare everything. By Friday afternoon, the relinquishment paperwork sat ready inside Martin's office. Still unsigned. Still reversible for 48 hours afterward. Part of me desperately wanted my father to stop me. To notice. To choose differently before Sunday dinner arrived. Then Friday evening happened. Aunt Patrice asked me to help set up decorations at the house. String lights. Extra chairs. Centerpieces. Diane directed everyone around like an event planner organizing an awards gala. While arranging napkins near the kitchen, I noticed Diane's phone buzzing on the counter. Face up. Group chat notification. Frell family. 3 members. Dad. Diane. Megan. Not me. The newest message preview glowed across the screen. After Sunday, we reclassify her shares as dormant. My stomach dropped instantly. Below it, my father replied. She won't even notice. Then Megan. Can we change the office locks too, LOL? I stood completely still. Kitchen faucet dripping softly nearby. Someone laughing outside. My entire family planning my administrative disappearance like scheduling landscaping work. I picked up Diane's phone carefully. Took screenshots. Sent them to myself. Deleted evidence from her messages. Then walked quietly into Harold's study. Same cedar desk. Same brass lamp. Same glass bare paperweight. I placed my hand against the wood slowly. Warm from afternoon sunlight. And finally understood something devastating. They weren't just replacing me emotionally anymore. They were preparing to erase me legally too. So I drove directly to Martin's office. Sat down beside the notary. And signed every document. Without hesitation this time. Father's Day dinner started at 6 sharp. Diane insisted on punctuality for important family moments. The house looked staged for a magazine spread. Candles glowing along the dining table. Fresh hydrangeas arranged beside crystal bowls. Photographer adjusting camera lenses near the staircase. Soft jazz drifting from hidden speakers. Everything polished. Everything curated carefully. Like appearances mattered more than the people inside them. Honestly. They usually did in Diane's world. I arrived at 5:53 carrying a bottle of wine I had no intention of opening. Diane greeted me at the front door wearing cream-colored silk and a smile sharp enough to qualify as decorative weaponry. Francis, she said warmly. So glad you could make it. Interesting sentence. Because invitations stop sounding sincere once someone spends years excluding you quietly. My father stood near the fireplace adjusting his tie repeatedly. Nervous energy radiating off him in waves. The white cloth still covered the framed document beside the mantel. Waiting. Performing suspense. Megan floated through the living room greeting relatives like she was already accepting an award. Champagne glass. Perfect curls. Carefully practiced humility. And honestly, that part hurt more than I expected. Not because Megan wanted love from my father. I understood that completely. Because she already had it. She just wanted proof I lost mine. 27 relatives crowded the dining room by 6:30. Aunt Patrice sat beside me deliberately. Small act. Big meaning. Cousin Nathan avoided eye contact entirely. Probably still thinking about the barbecue conversation. Dinner itself felt surreal. Roast chicken. Garlic potatoes. Stories bouncing around the table while everyone pretended nothing unusual waited beneath the white cloth near the fireplace. My father barely ate. Just kept folding and unfolding a yellow legal pad beneath the table. The speech. I recognized the pages immediately. 47 words. One sentence capable of ending a relationship permanently. Halfway through dessert, Diane tapped her wine glass gently with a fork. Tiny metallic chime. Instant silence. Because people conditioned around controlling personalities respond to small sounds like commands. Diane smiled brightly. Before coffee, she announced. Rick has something special he'd like to share tonight. There it was. My father stood slowly. Legal pad trembling slightly in his hands. And for one strange second, I actually hoped he wouldn't read it. That may be somewhere between writing the speech and standing up. He finally realized what he was about to do publicly. But then he unfolded the paper. Cleared his throat. And began. Family means more than blood. Safe opening. Polite murmurs around the table. Dad glanced toward Megan, smiling softly. Megan came into our lives 20 years ago. Pause. And from the beginning she brought light into this home. Megan's eyes watered instantly. Diane reached for her hand dramatically. The photographer moved closer. Of course there was a photographer. Dad kept reading. She's thoughtful. Kind. Loyal. Interesting. Because I couldn't remember my father publicly describing me once in my adult life. Then he reached the sentence. The one I already knew by heart. I finally have the daughter I always deserved. Silence. Not emotional silence. Shock silence. Aunt Patrice inhaled sharply beside me. Nathan stared down at his plate immediately. And suddenly, I realized something important. Other people knew this was wrong too. They'd just chosen comfort over confrontation for years. My father continued anyway. Voice shaking harder now. Tonight, I'm proud to officially adopt Megan as my daughter. Diane removed the white cloth from the gold frame dramatically. The adoption certificate gleamed beneath chandelier light. Megan started crying immediately. Full tears. Mascara carefully surviving anyway somehow. Relatives clapped uncertainly around the table. Polite applause. Confused applause. The kind people offer during moments they don't fully understand but feel socially required to support. My father looked toward me then. Finally. And honestly? I think he expected me to smile. Or quietly absorb it. Because that's what I'd done my entire life. Absorbed things. Shifted sideways so everyone else stayed comfortable. But something inside me had already changed Friday afternoon inside Martin Cope's office. I set my napkin down carefully beside the dessert plate. Then stood. The room quieted instantly. Diane's smile flickered slightly. Instinct. She sensed disruption immediately. Francis, my father said cautiously. I looked at him for a long moment. Gray hair near his temples now. Same hands that once lifted me onto a construction beam at 8 years old. Same voice that promised I'd hold everything together someday. And suddenly, I felt grief more than anger. Because weak people don't destroy relationships all at once. They surrender them piece by piece until nothing recognizable survives. I reached into my jacket pocket slowly, pulled out a sealed white envelope, and placed it directly beside his untouched coffee cup. "What's this?" Dad asked quietly. "Documentation," I answered. Diane leaned forward immediately. "What kind of documentation?" I looked directly at her. The kind Grandpa Harold prepared 27 years ago. Now the room went completely still. Because Harold's name still carried weight inside that house. Even dead. My father frowned. "Francis." I slid another paper across the table. "Photocopies. Group chat screenshots. Highlighted. Easy to read." Diane's face drained instantly. Megan stopped crying mid-breath. Dad stared down at the messages silently. "After Sunday we reclassify her shares as dormant. She won't even notice. Can we change the office locks too, lol?" The room physically shifted. Like oxygen changed density suddenly. Dad looked up slowly. Toward Diane first. Then Megan. And for the first time all evening, he looked awake. "What is this?" Diane recovered first. Predictably. "Rick, this is being taken completely out of context." "There is no context," Aunt Patrice interrupted sharply. First time anyone challenged Diane publicly in years. Honestly? The shock on Diane's face almost looked theatrical. My father reread the screenshots silently. Hands trembling harder now. Then looked toward me again. "What did you do?" Interesting question. Not. "Is this true?" Not. "I'm sorry." Just immediate fear. Because somewhere deep down, he already knew exactly what I'd done. I met his eyes calmly. Friday afternoon I executed Clause 7.3 of Grandpa's trust agreement. Blank stares around the table. Except Diane. She understood instantly. Actually grabbed the table edge. No. Martin Cope had explained it clearly enough for me to memorize. So I repeated it slowly. My 40% ownership share is now under mandatory buyback terms. I looked directly at my father. "You have 90 days to purchase my shares at independently appraised market value." Pause. Current estimate is approximately $320,000. Silence detonated across the room. Real silence. The kind where nobody even shifts in their chairs anymore. My father's face went pale immediately. Because Frell & Sons Construction didn't have $320,000 liquid. Not even close. Too many overleveraged projects. Too many delayed invoices. Too many financial decisions Harold used to manage personally before he died. And for the first time all evening, I saw genuine panic in Diane's eyes. Not embarrassment. Fear. Because suddenly, the daughter they planned to erase legally held the future of the company instead. Nobody moved for several seconds after I finished speaking. 27 relatives frozen around the dining table. Candles flickering softly. Coffee cooling untouched beside dessert plates. And my father staring at me like he no longer recognized the person sitting across from him. Honestly, maybe he didn't. Because people become dangerous once they finally stop accepting mistreatment quietly. Diane recovered first. Of course she did. Women like Diane survive through performance. Shock lasts only seconds before strategy returns. "This is ridiculous," she snapped sharply. "Francis, you can't possibly be serious." Interesting sentence. Not. "We're sorry." Not. "We made a mistake." Just immediate disbelief that consequences could actually arrive. I looked at her calmly. I signed everything Friday. My father swallowed hard. Clause 7.3. His voice barely above a whisper now. You triggered it? I nodded once. Yes. He leaned back slowly in his chair. And for the first time in years, I watched my father look genuinely afraid. Not of me. Of reality. Because reality doesn't care about family narratives once contracts become enforceable. Megan finally spoke. This is insane. Tears still running carefully down her face. You're destroying Dad's company because he adopted me? There it was. The rewritten version already forming. Not because they excluded me. Not because they tried erasing my ownership quietly. Not because my father publicly declared another daughter the one he always deserved. No. According to Megan, I was simply being emotional. Convenient how accountability always becomes cruelty once consequences arrive. Aunt Patrice set her coffee cup down hard enough to rattle silverware. No, she said sharply. He's doing this because you people spent 15 years pretending he didn't belong here. Silence. Total silence. Because once someone finally says the truth aloud, everybody else has to decide whether they'll keep lying. My father rubbed both hands over his face slowly. How bad is it? He asked quietly. Interesting. Not directed at me. Directed at himself. At the ceiling. At the realization settling into his chest like concrete. I answered honestly anyway. Martin estimates the company valuation around $800,000. Diane inhaled sharply. 40%. $320,000. 90 days. And Frell & Sons construction barely survived the previous winter slowdown already. My father understood the math instantly. Because despite everything, Rick Frell wasn't stupid. Just weak. And honestly, weakness destroys families more quietly than cruelty ever does. Dinner ended without dessert. Relatives left awkwardly in clusters whispering near the front hallway. The photographer disappeared before taking final pictures. Probably wise. No one wanted photographic evidence of the evening the Frell family detonated publicly. I grabbed my jacket from the coat rack near the stairs. Then heard my father's voice behind me. Francis. Not Franny. Francis. Formal. Careful. I turned slowly. Dad stood alone near the dining room doorway now. Tie loosened. Speech papers still sitting abandoned beside his coffee cup. And honestly? He looked older than 63 suddenly. Like reality aged him 10 years in one evening. Can we talk privately? I followed him into Harold's study. Same cedar desk. Same brass lamp. Same glass bare paperweight sitting exactly where it always had. Nothing changed in that room except the people inside it. Dad closed the door softly behind us. Then just stood there for a moment. Hands shaking slightly. Finally, he asked the question I'd waited years to hear. Did I really hurt you that badly? The sentence almost broke me. Not because it healed anything. Because he genuinely didn't know. That's the devastating thing about emotional neglect. The people causing it often experience your pain only as background noise. I looked around Harold's study slowly before answering. You let them erase me while I was standing right in front of you. Dad opened his mouth immediately. Then closed it again. No defense available. So I continued. My bedroom. The holidays. The company meetings. The portrait over the fireplace. Pause. You read a speech tonight saying you finally had the daughter you deserved. Dad sat down heavily in Harold's old chair. Hands covering his face now. I didn't think I know. That landed harder than yelling ever could. Because the problem was never hatred. It was absence. My father outsourced every difficult emotional decision to Diane for 15 years. Then acted surprised when his relationship with me disappeared. Finally, he looked up. Eyes red. What do you want me to do? Interesting question again. Because for the first time in my life, he was asking instead of assuming. I thought about it carefully. The company. The trust. Harold. The little girl version of myself who still wanted his father to choose him publicly just once. Then I answered honestly. I want you to stop pretending weakness is kindness. Silence. Heavy silence. Dad stared at the desk for several seconds. Then quietly whispered. She pushed harder after your grandfather died. There it was. Not accountability fully. But truth finally cracking through. She said you were independent. She said you didn't need us as much. I laughed once. Sharp. Disbelieving. Do you hear yourself? Dad closed his eyes immediately. Because suddenly, he did hear it. How absurd it sounded. How pathetic. How cowardly. And honestly? Watching him finally confront himself hurt worse than staying angry. He looked around Harold's study slowly. Then toward the framed company charter hanging near the bookshelf. Your grandfather knew this would happen. Not a question. A realization. I nodded once. He called you a good man with a weak spine. Dad actually flinched. Physical reaction. Like the words hit somewhere old and exposed. Then softly. He was right. We sat in silence for a long time after that. No dramatic music. No cinematic reconciliation. Just two exhausted people surrounded by decades of consequences finally speaking honestly. Eventually, Dad asked the question that mattered most. If I can't buy your shares? I answered calmly. The court restructures ownership. Meaning bankruptcy protection. Asset liquidation. Possible sale of controlling interest. The end of Frel & Sons construction exactly as my father understood it. Dad nodded slowly. Not arguing. Not bargaining. Just absorbing. Then quietly. I failed you. 14 years late. But true. And sometimes truth arriving late still matters. I reached into my jacket pocket. Pulled out one final envelope. Harold's handwritten note. I placed it on the cedar desk between us. Dad unfolded it carefully. Read silently. Then stopped halfway down the page. Tears filling immediately. What is it? I asked softly. Dad turned the paper slightly. A paragraph I hadn't noticed before. Written beneath the underlined sentence about weakness. If Francis ever triggers clause 7.3. Give him the second key. Dad stared at me silently. Then opened the bottom desk drawer slowly. Reached behind an old ledger book. And pulled out a small brass key. I frowned. What is that? Dad swallowed hard. Your grandfather opened a reserve account after your mother died. Pause. He never trusted the company to survive me completely. My stomach tightened instantly. Dad slid another document across the desk. Account records. Investment statements. Decades old. Harold had quietly built an emergency reserve fund tied to the company. Accessible only through dual authorization. Mine now included. Balance. $348,000. I stared at the number silently. Then looked up slowly. Dad laughed once through tears. Broken sound. He planned for both of us. And suddenly, I understood everything. Clause 7.3 was never about revenge. Harold wasn't trying to destroy the company. He was forcing accountability. Forcing my father to choose. Protect Diane's fantasy. Or repair the family he abandoned slowly. Dad looked at me across the desk. Real vulnerability now. No performance. No speeches. Is there any way to fix this? Long silence. Then finally, I answered honestly. I don't know yet. Because forgiveness isn't a switch. And family damage doesn't disappear because somebody finally admits it existed. But for the first time in 15 years, my father was actually sitting in the discomfort instead of escaping it. And honestly, that mattered. 3 weeks later, Diane moved out. No dramatic fight. No screaming. Just suitcases loaded quietly into Megan's SUV while neighbors pretended not to watch through curtains. Megan stopped speaking to me completely. Fine by me. Dad entered mediation with Martin Cope voluntarily. We restructured the company instead of triggering liquidation. Equal board oversight. Financial transparency. Independent accounting reviews. Actual accountability. Harder than bankruptcy, honestly. Because rebuilding trust requires daily effort instead of one dramatic ending. Last Sunday, Dad invited me to dinner. Just me. No Diane. No Megan. No speeches. When I arrived, the portrait over the fireplace was gone. In its place sat an old photograph I hadn't seen in years. My mother holding me at age 5. Dad standing beside us smiling. And honestly, that tiny change hurt more than the speech.